It's 8 o'clock, I guess, and we have limited time to get started. So to everybody that's joining us, good evening. This is the second installment of a legal education series for migrant workers that is being developed by Justice for Migrant Workers. For those of you who are tuning in, tonight's workshop is not really about migrant workers so much as it is for them. So what we've done is that we've put word out to the communities, letting them know that we're going to be speaking on subjects of interest and encouraging people to sign on and watch this Q&A session that we have to learn more about what's happening with COVID-19 and how it impacts the reality of migrant farm workers. And we're going to try and answer some of the questions that have come up from the community in relation to issues that they've been encountering. It's important to remember as well that this is legal information only. It's not legal advice, and it's not a substitute for legal advice. If you need to speak with a lawyer, Justice for Migrant Workers may be able to connect you with one who can assist free of charge. There's going to be a lot of information to cover about COVID-19 and how it impacts migrant communities. Tonight we'll just be scratching the surface of that discussion. So please stay tuned for more notices about future workshops on COVID-19 and also on other topics of interest as well. During the workshop, you can text your questions to 647-834-4932, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the presentation. Just by way of introduction, I can tell you my name's Shane Martinez. I'm a volunteer with Justice for Migrant Workers. I'm also a lawyer. I practice criminal defense law. I practice labor law and human rights law as well. And I'll let the other panelists introduce themselves also.
My name is Melissa Mohammed. I'm also a lawyer. I practice immigration and criminal law, and I'm a volunteer as well with Justicia.
And I'm Vania. I'm also a volunteer with Justicia.
And my name is Carolina, also a volunteer with Justicia. I'll do the Spanish presentation at this point. Buenas noches, esta es la segunda presentación de una serie de educación legal que está siendo desarrollada por Justicia para Trabajadores Migrantes para los trabajadores agrícolas migrantes. Es importante que recuerden que esta es una charla informativa legal, no es consejería legal ni sustituye de ninguna manera la consejería legal. Si usted necesita hablar con un abogado, Justicia para Trabajadores Migrantes puede conectarlo con un abogado que le asista de manera gratuita. Hay mucha información sobre el virus del COVID-19 y cómo impacta a las comunidades migrantes. Esta noche solo nos vamos a enfocar en lo que es más importante destacado. Por favor, estén pendientes de otros avisos sobre próximos talleres acerca del COVID-19 y otros temas de interés. Durante la presentación puede escribir sus preguntas por texto al número 647-834-4932 o por mensaje de Facebook y haremos nuestro mejor esfuerzo para responderlas al final de la presentación.
Thanks very much, Carolina. Just one quick thing I received a message about. You can also send messages by WhatsApp as well. So if you'd prefer to send them to that same number on WhatsApp, you can do that as well. También puedes mandar sus mensajes por WhatsApp también a este mismo número. So I think Malika is going to get us started with the question and answer segment. And then I'll go and we'll go over the questions and answers in English, and then we'll go over them in Spanish afterwards.
I'll just do that in Spanish to make sure that people understand what's going to happen next. Las primeras preguntas, Shane y Malika las van a responder en inglés. Van a ir sobre cada pregunta y respuesta en inglés. Al final, y después de eso, Vania y yo nos encargaremos de las preguntas y las respuestas en español.
And just for clarity, what we mean by that is halfway through the show, so around the 8:30 marker, that's when we'll move things over to the Spanish segment.
Y más o menos en las 8:30 de la noche es que vamos a movernos a la parte que es en español.
The first question we're looking at relates to personal autonomy. So do I have to be vaccinated against COVID-19 in order to return on the program? Will I be required to be vaccinated in the future? Getting the vaccination is actually voluntary. However, the government of Ontario has said that they plan to issue proof of vaccination cards to people who have received a COVID-19 vaccine. Because migrant workers typically live in congregate housing while working in Canada, and COVID-19 has been known to spread in these settings, Employers or the government could try to impose a requirement that workers be vaccinated in order to take part in the program. However, as of now, there is no official requirement under this program that you must be vaccinated. It is also unclear whether this will ever be made a requirement in the future. We will keep track of any updates as they come out, and we will respond as necessary to any proposed requirements by the government in this area. We will keep you up to date with any news. In terms of the timeline as to when migrant workers will get access to the vaccine, March 2021 appears to be the earliest date, but it will likely be a little bit later because of how slowly vaccinations are currently being done. Right now, we are under phase 1, where only frontline healthcare workers and long-term care workers are getting the vaccine. The National Advisory Committee on Immunization has recommended that people who live and work in congregate settings, and this includes accommodations for migrant workers, will be vaccinated during phase 2. Phase 2, as of now, is scheduled to start in March 2021.
Wonderful. The second question that we have is, can my employer require me to get a COVID-19 test as part of my employment? And what else are they allowed to ask of me apart from asking me to get a COVID-19 test? So this is a developing area of law. This situation is a bit of a challenging one because it requires a balancing act between two things. First, the employer's duty to provide a safe workplace. And second, each individual employee's right to privacy and bodily autonomy, meaning the right to decide what happens to your body. Typically, employers cannot require you to provide them with personal medical information or take tests. They need to have a compelling reason to do something like that. Now, COVID-19 is arguably a compelling reason for employers to implement a requirement along those lines. In doing so, the employer is helping keep people safe in the workplace and possibly keeping the community at large safe as well. Now, COVID-19 testing became increasingly common at farms and greenhouses this past summer when the outbreak reached critical levels among migrant farm workers. The employer cannot force you to take a test. However, they may impose a requirement as a condition of employment that you take a test. Now, whether you agree to that condition and accept the offer of employment is ultimately up to you. If you agree to a condition in your contract and then you don't consent to testing, where it's a condition of your employment, the employer could try to lay you off or they could try to end your employment. If your contract did not contain any condition regarding testing, but then your employer tries to impose one and you don't agree, then it's less likely that your refusal will impact your employment to that degree. In either circumstance, you should report any kind of layoff or termination to a lawyer or obtain legal advice about your specific situation. And as we mentioned, you can speak with a lawyer free of charge by contacting Justice for Migrant Workers. Now, apart from testing, your employer is allowed to screen you by asking you whether you have any symptoms, whether you've had any contact with people who have tested positive for COVID-19. They're also allowed likely to conduct a temperature check. That's usually where they have the thermometer gun, for lack of a better word, and they'll point it at your forehead and take your temperature, because the tests like that are typically not very invasive, and they also have, again, a compelling reason to do that. By cooperating and answering questions that they have, and consenting to temperature checks, that assists harm reduction measures across the board, and it really keeps everyone in the workplace safer in the long term. Now, the third question that we have has to do with reprisals. And the question is my employer allowed to terminate my employment if I speak out about my concerns regarding COVID-19 in the workplace? So the answer to that is no. Your employer is not allowed to terminate your employment if you speak out about health and safety concerns related to COVID-19 at work. Section 50 of Ontario's Occupational Health and Safety Act states that workers are protected from reprisals. So what's a reprisal? Well, a reprisal in this context is when the employer tries to impose a punishment, for example, terminating your employment, in response to you trying to raise health and safety complaints. What this means is that if you try to exercise your rights, for example, if you refuse to perform unsafe work, or if you ask your employer to follow health and safety laws, then your employer is not allowed to reprise against you as a result. That means that They can't react by firing you, threatening to fire you, by suspending you or disciplining you or threatening to do that. They're also not allowed to intimidate or bully you into not reporting the issues that you raised. They're also not allowed to reduce or change your hours or deny you a raise or benefits because you've brought up health and safety concerns. If you believe that the employer is engaged in a reprisal against you, you can contact Justice for Migrant Workers, or you can contact the Health and Safety Contact Center at 1-877-202-0008. We can provide you with that contact number again if you contact Justice for Migrant Workers. And likewise, you can always contact us as well, even if there's not a reprisal, even if the employer hasn't done something against you or threatened to do something. But if you have reported health and safety issues and they're not being acted upon, they're not being addressed, you can still contact us and we can try and help you navigate that situation as well.
Thanks, Shane. I'm going to try and speak a little louder. So residents, can the employer require me to reside at a specific address during my employment as a COVID-19 prevention measure? Can the employer prohibit me from leaving my worksite or residence? So for the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program, the SOP program, the contract actually requires that the worker reside in the housing provided by the employer. So in that case, yes, the employer can require you to reside at that address per the contract. If you do not, you could be in breach of the contract. If you are a SOP worker and are facing issues right now around your housing, you can contact Justicia for Migrant Workers for legal advice. For low-skilled workers or the agricultural stream who are not required to reside in employer-provided housing, the answer is no. The employer is not allowed to require you to live at a specific address as a COVID-19 prevention measure. For all workers, the Public Health Unit has said that no special rules are in place for migrant workers. This means that migrant workers are supposed to be treated the same as all other individuals living in Canada. So the employer is not allowed to prohibit you from leaving your worksite or your residence. That being said, we are aware that some employers have been telling their employees that they cannot leave their worksite or residence. If you are experiencing this, please contact Justicia for Migrant Workers, and we can provide you with some free legal assistance as to what you should do in that scenario. Please also keep in mind the COVID-19 related rules that are in place in your region. For example, Ontario is currently under a lockdown or a stay-at-home order, and there are strict rules about the reasons why you are allowed to be outside of your residence. Those restrictions will be discussed next by Shane.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Malika. So yeah, the next question, number 5, has to do with the stay-at-home order, which you may have heard a little bit about on the news. So the question is, what does the COVID-19 stay-at-home order require of me? So we're going to briefly look at something that's called Ontario Regulation 1112. Now that's the stay-at-home order, and it requires that every individual in the province remain in their place of residence at all times unless they're leaving their place of residence is necessary for one or more of the following purposes. And I'm going to go over the exceptions to staying at home. So if you have to attend work or school, or if it has to do with childcare reasons, if you're obtaining goods, for example, food or personal care items, or if you're obtaining essential services, for example, services from a financial institution like a bank, a government agency, or let's say a social service provider that's dealing with helping you deal with an addiction or other important issue that you're encountering. There's also exemptions if you're assisting a person who requires care. Medical emergencies are exempted as well. People who are fleeing domestic violence or helping others leave those types of situations, those people are also exempt if they have to leave their home for that specific purpose. You're allowed to leave your residence for the purpose of exercising as well. And you're also allowed to leave for the purpose of traveling to an airport, a bus station, or train station for the purpose of traveling outside the province. And in addition to traveling to do all of these things that I just went over, the exemption also applies to returning to your home afterwards as well. So this is a summary of the exceptions, which are really the most relevant ones to migrant farm workers. Now, additional exceptions do apply. Even when the stay-at-home order is lifted, additional restrictions will apply in relation to public gatherings. There'll be rules that have to do with wearing masks in public places and so on. Future workshops are going to address those restrictions. However, for the time being, we've just focused in on the current state of the law and the stay-at-home order itself, what it requires of you, and what those exceptions are. If you have questions, again, you can reach out to us and you can let us know.
Thanks, Shane. So in terms of access to the vaccine, one of the questions we've received is, as an undocumented worker, am I able to access COVID-19 testing or receive the vaccine? So yes, undocumented workers are able to access COVID-19 testing for free. The list of places that offer testing can be found on the Canadian government's COVID-19 related website. Also, during the pandemic, public healthcare in Ontario has been made available to everyone, regardless of his or her status, free of charge. This includes both COVID and non-COVID related medical illnesses or injuries. If you've been treated at a hospital or medical center and have received a bill for your care, please call Justicia for migrant workers, and we can put you in contact with someone who may be able to help. In terms of the vaccinations, the Government of Canada website says that free vaccinations will be available to everyone who lives in Canada over the course of 2021. It seems then that the vaccine should be available to everyone regardless of status. However, the government has not confirmed this yet. Justicia is currently working on a letter to the government to ensure that the vaccine is accessible and free for everyone, including both temporary foreign workers and undocumented workers. We will keep you up to date on any new information as it comes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Malika. And the last question that we have for this evening is, apart from the ones that any of you may be sending in right now, can the police stop me if I am out during a COVID-19 stay-at-home order? And if they are allowed to stop me, do I have to answer their questions? So the police can only stop you if they have what are called reasonable and probable grounds to believe that you're committing an offense. For example, not complying with the special emergency rules. In addition to the police having this power, special constables and municipal bylaw enforcement officers can also stop you and ask you to identify yourself. Now, in addition to there being rules which apply across the province, municipalities have also passed their own rules. You should check and see what rules apply to the area that you're living in. When you're asked to identify yourself by a police officer, a special constable, or a bylaw enforcement officer, there's three things that you have to provide to them. You have to provide your legal name, your address, and your date of birth. If you're found to be in violation of a COVID-19 emergency rule, you may be charged with what's called a provincial offense. Now, a provincial offense is not a crime under the criminal code, but it can carry similar consequences, which we'll talk about in a moment. The police could issue you a ticket or a summons to attend court. Penalties for these types of offenses are set out under the Reopening Ontario Act and the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act, and I'll talk about them in a moment as well. Now, if you refuse to provide your name, your address, or your date of birth to the police, then you could be arrested and charged with a criminal offense that's called obstruct police. Now, apart from your legal name, address, and date of birth, you're not required to provide the police with any information or answer any of their questions. However, if you believe that you're not breaking any of the emergency rules, you may wish to cooperate and explain to them why you're outside during the stay-at-home order. That may help you avoid a ticket, or it may guarantee that you get one. It's impossible to say, but it's up to you to exercise your best judgment in those circumstances. Now, in other circumstances, for example, let's say that the police are questioning you because they suspect that you were involved in a crime. In situations like that, which are a bit more serious and have more gravity to them, then it may be preferable to simply exercise your right to silence and not say anything at all in response to their questions, apart from, again, your name, address, and your date of birth. Now, the standard fine issued for a breach of the COVID-19 emergency rules is $750. If you obstruct an officer who's trying to issue a fine, that could result in you being fined $1,000. If you host a gathering, let's say a party or something like that, in which numerous people get together in breach of the COVID-19 rules, there would be a minimum fine of $10,000. The maximum punishment for breaches is 1 year in jail or a fine of up to $100,000. Now, getting a ticket does not automatically mean that you're guilty, but if you wish to challenge it, you'll need to take specific steps to schedule a trial. And Justice for Migrant Workers can help you guide through that process. All right. Now, those are the questions that we've set up for this evening based on input that we've received from the communities. There are some questions coming in right now, but I think what we'll do, just taking a look at the time, we'll continue with the Spanish portion of this, and then we'll come back and we'll answer all of the questions together at the end of the workshop.
Thank you, Shane. Esta es la porción de las preguntas que hemos recibido por parte de la comunidad. Ahora viene la traducción de las mismas preguntas en español. Vamos a ir una por una y al final respondemos todas las preguntas que tengan y que están apareciendo en el chat que tenemos en línea. Para la primera pregunta, ¿tengo que vacunarme contra el COVID-19 para volver al programa? ¿Se me exigirá que me vacune en el futuro? La respuesta es que vacunarse es voluntario. Sin embargo, el gobierno de Ontario ha dicho que planea emitir tarjetas de prueba de vacunación a las personas que hayan recibido la vacuna del COVID-19. Debido a que los trabajadores migrantes suelen vivir en viviendas colectivas mientras trabajan en Canadá y se sabe que el COVID-19 se ha propagado en estos lugares, es posible que los empleadores o el gobierno puedan tratar de imponer el requisito de que los trabajadores se vacunen para poder participar en el programa. Eso dicho, hasta este momento no existe un requisito oficial de que se deban vacunar y tampoco está claro si esto se va a convertir en un requisito a futuro. Vamos a estar en constante seguimiento de cualquier actualización a medida que se publiquen y responderemos como sea necesario a cualquier requisito propuesto por el gobierno en esta área. Los mantendremos al día con cualquier noticia. En cuanto a la fecha de acceso de los trabajadores migrantes a la vacuna, marzo de 2021 parece ser la fecha más temprana, pero probablemente será un poco más tarde debido a la lentitud con la que se están realizando las vacunaciones. En este momento estamos en lo que han llamado la fase 1, en la que solo los trabajadores de la salud de primera línea y los trabajadores de cuidados a largo plazo están recibiendo la vacuna. El Comité Asesor Nacional de Inmunización ha recomendado que las personas que viven y trabajan en entornos de congregación, que esto incluye los alojamientos para trabajadores migrantes, sean vacunadas durante la fase 2. Está previsto que la fase 2 comience en marzo del 2021.
Ok, la segunda pregunta es sobre las pruebas. La pregunta es, ¿puede mi empleador exigirme que me haga una prueba de COVID-19 como parte de mi empleo? ¿Qué se les permite pedirme? Esta es un área de la ley que todavía está en desarrollo. Esta situación es difícil porque requiere un acto de equilibrio entre, por una parte, el deber del empleador de proporcionar un lugar de trabajo seguro y, por otra parte, el derecho individual del empleado a la privacidad y la autonomía corporal, es decir, el derecho a decidir lo que pasa con su cuerpo. Normalmente, los empleadores no pueden exigirle que le proporcione información médica o que se someta a pruebas. Necesitan tener una razón de peso para hacerlo. Y COVID-19 es sin duda una razón de peso para que los empleadores implementen este requisito. Al hacerlo, el empleador está ayudando a mantener a la gente en el lugar de trabajo segura y posiblemente también a la comunidad. Las pruebas de COVID-19 se hicieron cada vez más comunes en granjas e invernaderos este verano, cuando el brote alcanzó niveles críticos entre los trabajadores agrícolas migrantes. Aunque el empleador no puede forzarlo a participar en una prueba, pueden poner tal requisito como condición de su empleo. El que usted acepte esa condición y la oferta de empleo depende de usted. Si usted aceptó esa condición en su contrato y luego no consiente en la realización de la prueba como condición de su empleo, el empleador podría despedirlo o poner fin a su empleo. Si su contrato no contenía ninguna condición relacionada a las pruebas, pero su empleador trata de imponer una y usted no está de acuerdo, entonces es menos probable que su rechazo afecte a su empleo. En cualquiera de las dos circunstancias, usted debe informar de cualquier despido o terminación a un abogado para obtener asesoramiento legal sobre su situación específica. Puede hablar con un abogado sin costo alguno contactando Justicia para los Trabajadores Migrantes. Les proporcionaremos nuestra información de contacto al final de la sesión. Además de las pruebas, su empleador puede examinarlo preguntando si tiene algún síntoma o si ha tenido algún contacto con personas que han dado positivo en las pruebas de COVID-19. También es probable que se les permita realizar un control de temperatura, ya que hay una razón importante para hacerlo y no es invasivo. Cooperar respondiendo a tales preguntas y dar consentimiento a los controles de temperatura ayuda a las medidas de reducción de daños y mantiene a todos seguros.
Gracias, Vania. La tercera pregunta, ¿se le permite a mi empleador despedirme si hablo sobre mis preocupaciones sobre el COVID-19 en el lugar de trabajo? No, su empleador no puede despedirlo si usted habla de sus preocupaciones sobre la salud y la seguridad relacionadas con el COVID-19 en el trabajo. La sección 50 del Acto de Salud y Seguridad Ocupacional de Ontario establece que los trabajadores están protegidos de represalias. Una represalia es cuando el empleador trata de imponer un castigo, por ejemplo, el despido, en respuesta a sus quejas sobre salud y seguridad. Esto significa que si usted trata de ejercer sus derechos, por ejemplo, negarse a realizar un trabajo inseguro o pedir a su empleador que cumpla las leyes de salud y seguridad, su empleador no podrá tomar represalias contra usted como las siguientes. 1. Despidiéndolo o amenazándolo con despedirle. 2. Suspendiéndolo o disciplinándolo o amenazándolo con hacerlo. 3. Intimidándolo o acosándolo para que no informe sobre los problemas que se presentan en su lugar de trabajo. 4. Reduciendo o cambiando el horario o negándole un aumento de sus beneficios. Si cree que el empleador ha tomado una represalia en su contra, puede comunicarse con Justicia para Trabajadores Migrantes para poder obtener asistencia legal gratuita o llamar al Centro de Contacto de Salud y Seguridad al 1877-202-0008. Es un número gratuito, de lunes a viernes, de 8:30 a 5 p.m. Asimismo, puede comunicarse con Justicia para Trabajadores Migrantes o el Centro de Contacto de Salud y Seguridad, aunque no haya recibido ninguna represalia, pero todavía tenga preocupaciones sobre su salud y seguridad y cosas que su empleador no esté atendiendo.
Ahora, la cuarta pregunta es sobre el tema de las residencias. ¿Puede el empleador exigirme que resida en una dirección específica durante mi empleo como medida de prevención de COVID-19? ¿Puede el empleador prohibirme que abandone mi lugar de trabajo o residencia? Los contratos del Programa de Trabajadores Agrícola de temporada requieren que el trabajador resida en una vivienda proporcionada por el empleador. Así que en ese caso sí, el empleador puede exigirle que resida en esa residencia según el contrato. Si no lo hace, podría estar incumpliendo el contrato. Si usted es un trabajador de este programa y está enfrentando problemas en relación a su vivienda, puede contactar a Justicia para los Trabajadores Migrantes para que lo asesoren. En el caso de los trabajadores poco calificados o de la corriente agrícola que no están obligados a residir en una vivienda proporcionada por el empleador, la respuesta es no. El empleador no está autorizado a exigirle que viva en una dirección específica como medida de prevención de COVID-19. Para todos los trabajadores, la Dependencia de Salud Pública ha dicho que no existen normas especiales para los trabajadores migrantes, que deben de ser tratados de la misma manera que todas las demás personas que viven en Canadá. Por lo tanto, el empleador no puede prohibirle que abandone su lugar de trabajo o su residencia. Dicho esto, estamos conscientes de que algunos empleadores han estado diciendo a sus empleados que no pueden abandonar su lugar de trabajo o residencia. Si usted está experimentando esto, puede contactar a Justicia para los Trabajadores Migrantes para obtener asistencia legal gratuita. Por favor, tengan en cuenta las normas relacionadas al COVID-19 que están en vigor en su región. Ontario se encuentra actualmente bajo una orden de encierro o de quedarse en casa y hay reglas estrictas sobre las razones por las que se le permite estar fuera de su residencia. Esas restricciones serán discutidas a continuación.
La siguiente pregunta es sobre ese tema, sobre la orden de permanencia en el hogar. ¿Qué requiere de mí la orden de permanencia en el hogar COVID-19? Entonces, veamos brevemente la regulación 1112 de Ontario, que es la orden de quedarse en casa. Requiere que cada individuo permanezca en su lugar de residencia en todo momento, a menos que salir de su casa de residencia sea necesario para uno o más de los siguientes propósitos. 1. Trabajo, escuela o cuidado de niños. 2. Para obtener bienes, por ejemplo, alimentos y artículos de cuidado personal o servicios de una institución financiera, de una agencia gubernamental o proveedor de servicios sociales. Para ayudar a una persona que requiera cuidados. 4. Para emergencias. 5. Para huir de una situación de violencia doméstica o ayudarle a alguien que esté experimentando una situación de violencia doméstica. 6. Con el fin de ejercitarse. Y, por último, para viajar a un aeropuerto, a una estación de autobuses o a una estación de tren, con el fin de viajar fuera de la provincia. Esto es un resumen únicamente de las excepciones más relevantes para los trabajadores migrantes. Hay otras excepciones que también aplican. Incluso cuando se levante la orden de permanencia en el hogar, se aplicarán restricciones adicionales en relación a las reuniones públicas, el uso de máscara en lugares públicos, etc. En talleres a futuro se abordarán estas restricciones, pero por el momento nos centramos en el estado actual de la ley.
Y la siguiente pregunta es sobre el acceso a la vacuna. La pregunta es, ¿como trabajador indocumentado, puedo acceder a las pruebas de COVID-19 o recibir la vacuna? Sí, los trabajadores indocumentados pueden acceder a las pruebas de COVID-19 de forma gratuita. La lista de lugares que ofrecen pruebas se puede encontrar en el sitio web del gobierno canadiense relacionado al COVID-19. Durante la pandemia, la atención de salud pública en Ontario se ha puesto a disposición de todos, independientemente de su estado migratorio, de forma gratuita. Esto incluye tanto las enfermedades o lesiones médicas relacionadas con el COVID y no relacionadas con el COVID. Si usted ha sido tratado en un hospital o centro médico y ha recibido una factura por su atención, por favor llame a Justicia para los Trabajadores Migrantes y podemos ponerle en contacto con alguien que pueda ayudarlo. En el sitio web del Gobierno de Canadá se dice que en el transcurso del año 2021 se pondrán vacunas gratuitas a disposición de todos los que viven en Canadá. Parece entonces que la vacuna debería estar disponible para todos, independientemente de su estatus. Sin embargo, el gobierno no ha confirmado esto todavía. Justicia está trabajando en una carta al gobierno para asegurar que la vacuna sea accesible y gratuita para todos, incluyendo tanto a los trabajadores extranjeros temporales como a los indocumentados. Los mantendremos al día con cualquier nueva información que llegue.
Y para la última pregunta, ¿puede la policía detenerme si estoy fuera durante una orden de permanencia en casa de COVID-19? ¿Tengo que responder a sus preguntas? La policía solo puede detenerlo o detenerle si tiene motivos razonables y probables para creer que está cometiendo una ofensa, como no cumplir con las reglas especiales de emergencia. Además de la policía que tiene este poder, también están los alguaciles especiales y oficiales municipales encargados de hacer el cumplimiento de la ley, que también podrían detenerle y pedirle que se identifique. Además de las normas que aplican en toda la provincia, los municipios también han aprobado sus propias normas. Es importante que compruebe qué normas se aplican en las zonas en que usted vive en este momento. Cuando un oficial de policía, un alguacil especial o un oficial que haga el cumplimiento de la ley, le pida que se identifique, debe proporcionarle su nombre completo, nombre legal, dirección y la fecha de nacimiento. Si se descubre que ha violado las reglas de emergencia de COVID-19, se le puede acusar de lo que se llama una ofensa provincial Una ofensa provincial no es un delito según el Código Criminal, pero puede tener consecuencias similares. La policía puede emitir una multa o una citación para asistir y presentarse en la corte. Las sanciones se establecen en el acto de reapertura de Ontario y el acto de gestión de emergencias y protección civil. Si usted se niega a proporcionar su nombre legal, dirección y fecha de nacimiento, entonces podría ser arrestado y acusado de una ofensa criminal llamada obstrucción a la policía. Aparte de su nombre legal, dirección y fecha de nacimiento, no está obligado a proporcionar a la policía ninguna información ni a responder a ninguna de sus preguntas. Sin embargo, si se cree que no está infringiendo que no está infringiendo las normas de emergencia, tal vez quisiera cooperar y explicarles por qué está fuera durante una orden de emergencia y de permanencia en el hogar. Esto le podría ayudar a evitar una multa. En otras circunstancias, por ejemplo, si la policía lo está interrogando porque sospecha que usted estuvo involucrado en un crimen, entonces preferiblemente es mejor que ejerza su derecho al silencio y no diga nada en absoluto. La multa estándar por incumplimiento de las reglas de emergencia de COVID-19 es de $750. Obstruir a un oficial que está tratando de emitir una multa resultará en una multa de $1,000. Si usted organiza una reunión donde se reúnen numerosas personas en violación de las reglas de COVID-19, se aplicará una multa mínima de $10,000. El castigo máximo es 1 año de cárcel y una multa de hasta $100,000. Recibir una multa no significa automáticamente que sea culpable, pero si llegase a desear objetar esta multa, tendrá que tomar medidas específicas para programar un juicio. Justicia para los trabajadores migrantes podría ayudarle a guiarlo a través de ese proceso.
Wonderful. Thanks, Vanya and Carolina. That was wonderful. And we do have a number of questions that have come in, so we'll go through those. Malik and I will take those on one by one, and I guess after we do one in Spanish, then we'll kind of have we'll go over it after we go over it in English, then we'll go over it in Spanish, and we'll just kind of work through the questions that way. So the first question had to do with COVID testing and who pays for it. Because as we know, workers are required to have COVID testing done prior to coming to Canada, prior to getting on the plane. And so the question is, who's going to cover that cost? So to take a couple steps back on January 7th, new rules came into effect which state that adults who are coming to Canada need to have a negative COVID-19 test that had been completed within 72 hours of them boarding the plane. Now, for migrant farm workers, this is obviously an issue. There's a number of reasons. One, a lot of migrant farm workers live in rural areas, and there's nowhere nearby for them to actually get a test done before they have to go and attend at the airport and get on the plane. Two, the cost can be quite a bit. It can be between, close to $200 to $300 Canadian, depending on the country and the area where the test is happening at. And that's a lot of money that people don't have in their pockets in the off season. And also there's the risk that's inherent in traveling that long distance if you live in the country to try and get somewhere to get a test done. So all of that together kind of coalesces and presents, a really unique risk and challenging situation for migrant farm workers. Now, Justicia for Migrant Farm Workers, we raised concerns with the federal government about this just last week. We sent off a letter explaining to them why this presents a burden for migrant farm workers. And it's our position that either the government or employers here should be covering that cost. Now, despite the fact that that's our position, the reality is right now is that cost is being passed on to migrant workers because it seems to be that the government and employers both know that workers are just desperate to get here. They're desperate to engage in employment here, and that they'll find the money somehow to cover the cost of that test. I think one thing that's important is for you to save the receipt from having the test done. Bring that receipt with you when you come to Canada. And maybe down the road, we'll see how things develop. And maybe there will be an opportunity, depending on your employer or on government policy, for there to be a reimbursement of that cost. Obviously, we can't guarantee that, but that's something that we're pushing for, is to is to have those costs covered by someone other than the workers themselves. Another thing to keep in mind as well is that even if you come here and you have that negative COVID test from 72 hours prior, the 14-day quarantine rule still applies. So you're still going to be in isolation for 14 days after you arrive in Canada, despite having the negative test.
I'm going to try my best to translate what you just said. That was quite long, Shane.
I apologize.
Keep it shorter for translation.
I will.
Ok. Hay una pregunta en el chat que se refiere si los trabajadores van a tener que pagar por ese examen de COVID que hay que hacerse antes de venir a Canadá. Ahora, lo que entró en regulación el 7 de enero recientemente es que cualquier adulto que entre a Canadá tiene que tener un resultado negativo de COVID-19 de menos de 72 horas antes de llegar a este territorio, antes de montarse en el avión. Esto presenta unas dificultades para los trabajadores migrantes por tres problemas en específico. El primero es que los trabajadores migrantes se encuentran en áreas rurales y es difícil acceder a servicios médicos inmediatos que puedan proveer este tipo de examinación. Lo segundo es el costo de este tipo de exámenes. Estamos hablando de entre $200 y $300, que es una cifra bastante alta. Y lo tercero es que toma tiempo recibir esos resultados de los exámenes. No estoy segura si eso fue lo que dijiste, Shane, pero eso fue lo que anoté. Corrígeme de lo contrario. Ahora, la semana pasada, Justicia para Trabajadores Migrantes presentó una carta al gobierno federal precisamente tratando este punto, que es bastante delicado, y que no es justo que los trabajadores migrantes tengan que cubrir este costo. A pesar de esto, lo que sabemos es que el gobierno y los empleadores saben que los trabajadores migrantes están desesperados por venir a trabajar y harían lo que sea necesario para poder llegar aquí, y por eso de pronto no están tomando unas medidas en el asunto. Y asumen que ustedes harán lo que sea necesario para encontrar ese dinero para poder llegar aquí a trabajar. Entonces, lo que se puede hacer es que pueden conseguir el dinero, hacerse el examen y traer su recibo para que eventualmente se pueda quizás recuperar el dinero a través de los empleadores o a través del gobierno con algún tipo de cambio en la legislación o cambio en las medidas que se están tomando con respecto a lo que se requiere para que los trabajadores migrantes vengan a Canadá.
Y nada más agregando, Carolina, también se mencionó que aunque se consiga el examen del COVID negativo, la regla de hacer 14 días de cuarentena también aplica. Entonces, aunque tengan un resultado negativo, todavía aplica la regla de quedarse aislados por 14 días.
Gracias, Vania.
No, de nada, es excelente.
Great teamwork. So I'm going to deal with another question that came in, and that is about the deduction of meals, the cost of meals from your paycheck during the initial 14-day quarantine period. So the answer to this question is a little bit tricky. The Government of Canada's website says that the employer is not allowed to deduct any quarantine-related deductions from your paycheck unless there's an agreement between you and the employer. And this is with respect to food. So if you enter into agreement with the employer that they can buy your groceries during that time period, then in that case, yes, they are allowed to make some deductions according to the Canadian government website. However, you are not required to enter into such an agreement with your employer. What you are required to do before coming to Canada is to have a plan as to how you will get access to food and groceries without leaving your residence during that first 14-day period. This can be an arrangement that you can make without your employer, as I said. We have unfortunately been hearing of some cases where employers have been forcing the employees to sign an agreement that they will pay them back for the food and that the employer will deduct that from their paycheck. And we've also heard of cases where this is being done without any sort of agreement being in place. What we would suggest that you do in this case, if this applies to you, is to first document what the employers are deducting from your paycheck and keep those documents with you. You can take photos of it, keep the actual pay stubs that you have, That's very important to have as much of this evidence as you can get. The second part is to contact us at Justicia so we can strategize with you as to what possible steps we can take in order to alleviate the situation.
Vani, ¿quieres darle con esta?
Puedes empezar y luego...
Okay.
No te escuchaba muy bien, perdón.
Sí, sí.
Oh, sorry, it's English.
Con respecto a la siguiente pregunta que se nos presenta es con respecto a las deducciones que se están haciendo de los salarios que ustedes reciben con respecto a las comidas en el periodo de cuarentena de esos 14 días. Esta pregunta, dice Malika, es complicada de responder porque en el sitio web del gobierno canadiense lo que dice es que los empleadores pueden hacer esas deducciones a su salario, a su cheque que ustedes reciben, si ustedes entran en un acuerdo con el empleador en que ellos van a hacer estas deducciones por las compras de comida o cosas de la despensa que ustedes necesiten. Sin embargo, lo que tienen que tener en cuenta y es importante es que ustedes no están requeridos a entrar en un acuerdo con el empleador. Pero lo que sí les sugerimos que hagan más bien es que antes de llegar a Canadá, ustedes hagan un arreglo fuera de su contacto con su empleador de cómo van a poder obtener comida y la despensa durante esos 14 días de cuarentena. Hemos escuchado casos donde los empleadores han hecho que los trabajadores firmen ese acuerdo donde digan que les van a pagar ese dinero y que ellos lo van a deducir de su salario. De nuevo, lo que les sugerimos es que que documenten todo lo que firmen, todo lo que sus empleadores, todas las deducciones que sus empleadores hagan, bien sea del papelito que les entregan cuando les pagan cada 15 días, bien sea tomando una foto, guardando toda la evidencia, es importante. Y lo segundo es que se contacte con nosotros para poder planear una estrategia sobre este punto.
All right, and we have a third question as well, and the question is pretty straightforward. It's simply, will we have a chance to work this year? Now, that question, I guess, can be answered differently depending on what program you're coming here under. If you're coming under the seasonal program, if you have a work permit that's open and allows you more mobility. But I think that the optimistic but uncertain answer is yes. It appears as though the government is going to continue to facilitate the entry of migrant farm workers to Canada under all of the programs at present. There are going to be challenges with this, but the thing to remember is that you are absolutely essential to the livelihood and sustainability of Canada, in particular the agricultural industry, which keeps us fed, as healthcare workers are essential to the hospitals. So the role that you play here is such a valuable and important one that the government cannot sacrifice a year of not having you here. So I think that they're going to do everything possible to make sure that happens. It is going to be a year, though, of, I think, a lot of challenges and a lot of obstacles and probably a lot of dangers and risks as well. So as Malika was saying, you're going to want to be certain to keep detailed records of everything that's happening to you in the workplace. Bring a notepad, bring a journal with you, and keep a daily diary about what's happening, the things that you're seeing in the workplace, your experiences, deductions out of your pay in relation to COVID that you weren't aware of, health and safety issues that you're encountering, any other types of discrimination or harassment or maltreatment that may arise in the workplace. Keep detailed notes about it and be sure to reach out to people in the community, groups such as Justice for Migrant Workers, and let us know so that we can try and assist and put you in contact with other allies as well, who can help try remedy those situations and keep you safe.
Ok. La tercera pregunta es si se va a poder seguir viniendo a Canadá para trabajar. Y la respuesta varía dependiendo del programa y del tipo de permiso de trabajo que ustedes tengan, sea cerrado o abierto, donde se puede trabajar para muchos empleadores. Pero la respuesta optimista es que sí, porque lo que es importante que ustedes sepan es que el trabajo que ustedes hacen en Canadá es trabajo considerado esencial, así como la gente que trabaja en los hospitales son considerados trabajadores esenciales, ustedes también lo son para la sociedad. Y es por eso que nosotros creemos que el gobierno no puede perder esa oportunidad ni sacrificar su empleo, pero lo que sí es cierto es que va a haber muchos retos y muchos riesgos, y por eso es que nosotros les recomendamos que mantengan un cuaderno documentando todas sus experiencias, las deducciones que están recibiendo del trabajo, problemas de salud y de seguridad que ustedes encuentren en el trabajo, y también casos de acoso, de abuso que estén experimentando. Y lo importante es que busquen ayuda, por ejemplo, con nosotros, con Justicia para los Trabajadores Migrantes, para que veamos qué tipo de apoyo les podemos dar y conectemos con otros aliados en la comunidad para ver cómo se les puede apoyar.
Thanks, Fania. I see that we have two comments as well, and I'll read both of them in English, and then we can go over them in Spanish. So the first one was one of the viewers commented that the issue is that flights have to be coordinated, but COVID results take 2 to 3 days to be delivered. And workers themselves, what I draw from that comment is the workers themselves aren't the ones arranging the flights. So they'll receive word of the flight, and then within a very short window, they have to get a COVID test. And that can be very challenging for workers depending on where they're at and what their circumstances are. The other comment as well was in relation to food, and Malika gave a great answer about that question. The food is bought by the employer. He assigns a person, and you give him your list of items to purchase. So I think that comment is kind of outlining what the experiences are, is that people are, being asked to provide shopping lists, and then employers are purchasing items and bringing them back. What we have heard from a number of workers is that the lists aren't necessarily being followed in any great detail, and employers are kind of just picking up what they want and bringing them back to bunkhouses, despite whatever's on the list. But I appreciate that comment as well about how it's working. That gives us a bit of insight into what's happening there, and that's definitely a method that we've heard a little bit about.
Hay dos comentarios, Vania, yo voy a hablar sobre el primero y te dejo la oportunidad de referirte al segundo. El primer comentario que apareció en nuestro chat es el punto de la coordinación que se requiere entre poder recibir el examen, tener los resultados y poder abordar el avión. Y lo que comenta esta persona es que la dificultad está precisamente en que se recibe una respuesta, se recibe un mensaje de última hora de cuándo va a ser el vuelo, lo cual pone a los trabajadores en una situación difícil, tratando de encontrar la manera de hacerse ese examen en ese periodo de tiempo donde puedan también obtener esos resultados. Gracias por ese comentario, tenemos en cuenta. Y
otro comentario que algún participante compartió es sobre el tema de la comida y cómo se está consiguiendo la comida durante ese tiempo de 14 días. Perdón, si es de 14 o de 14 días, y lo que comentan es que el sistema que se ha implementado es que los trabajadores le dan una lista sobre los productos que necesitan al empleador y el empleador hace la compra, pero lo que está pasando es que muchas veces el empleador termina comprando como lo que quiere y no sigue al pie de la letra de la lista que los trabajadores le están proporcionando. Es por eso que es importante que ustedes mantengan documentación de todo.
Okay. So there's another question that just came in. It's about EI benefits. So I'll read the question out, and the question says, we are going home on the 22nd of January, but we have to file for our EI on the 23rd of January for a 2-week period. Could we get some information on that, please? If we could still file for it before we go home, thanks. Okay, so EI is a really complicated issue. Your eligibility for EI depends on a number of things. It depends on what kind of a program you're here in Canada on, whether it's seasonal or otherwise. It also depends on what kind of EI benefits you're seeking, whether they're sick benefits, regular benefits. Not everyone has the same type of entitlements, even though everyone's paying into the system. Some workers have lesser entitlements. What we would suggest is that if you're reporting for a period that includes January 21st, you would need to advise that you were not available on each day within that period, if that's indeed the case. There's a number of nuances about how, again, about whether or not there would be entitlements and exactly how you should make your declaration. I would encourage whoever asked that question to perhaps reach out so we can get some more information and make sure that we can give you as precise an answer as possible, given your own individual circumstances.
Vania, ¿quieres responder la pregunta?
Sí. La otra pregunta que se hace es, nosotros nos vamos a nuestro país en enero 22, pero tenemos que meter nuestra petición para los beneficios de desempleo en enero 23 para la semana anterior. ¿Podríamos tener información, por favor? Y si necesitamos mandar la aplicación para los beneficios antes de que nos regresemos. Y lo que se decía es que la elegibilidad para estos beneficios depende mucho del programa en el que ustedes estén viniendo a Canadá y también el tipo de beneficios que ustedes quieran obtener, ya sea beneficios por estar enfermos o son beneficios regulares. Y también otra cosa que hay que considerar es que no todo el mundo tiene acceso a los mismos beneficios, aunque sí hagan el pago por ellos. Entonces, lo que se recomienda es que si tienen preguntas más detalladas puedan comunicarse con nosotros para que podamos determinar cómo se hace la aplicación y cuáles serían los beneficios a los que sí podrían tener acceso.
We did receive a question having to do with quarantine. Malika, did you want to answer that one?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So the question was, where do you go or who pays for, I believe it was for the accommodations when you arrive in Canada for quarantine for that first 14-day period. So this will depend a little bit on the type of program you're in and whether the employer is required to provide your accommodation for you. If they are, then they are required to provide you an accommodation where you can quarantine, and you're only with other workers who are also in their quarantine period. They would cover the cost of that accommodation, and you would actually be paid, you're required to be paid a minimum of 30 hours per week at your regular hourly rate of pay during that 14 days, even though you're not working. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, it's, yeah, I think your answer pretty much sums it up. I won't belabor it.
Ok, la otra pregunta que se hizo fue sobre la acomodación durante estos 14 días de cuarentena y la pregunta es si ustedes necesitan encontrar una dirección donde quedarse o si el empleador la provee. Y nuevamente la respuesta depende mucho del programa por el que ustedes estén viniendo a Canadá, porque dependiendo del programa, a veces sí el empleador es responsable de proveer una residencia durante este periodo. Y la última parte no escuché muy bien.
Sí, si el empleador está obligado a proveerle acomodación durante ese periodo y eso está bajo el tipo de programa al que usted viene, entonces lo debe hacer y esa acomodación es únicamente compartida con otros trabajadores que también estén durante el periodo de cuarentena y el costo de esa acomodación la debe pagar el empleador. Lo otro importante es que durante ese periodo el empleador debe pagarle a usted por 30 horas de trabajo semanales, esto es mandatorio, al precio regular por hora que se le paga normalmente.
There's just one last question that I'll touch on really quickly, and we've received some additional comments as well. So for everybody that's sending in comments as well, thank you very much for those. We're reading all of them. The last question was just, I think, a bit of a follow-up on what I asked earlier about EI, and the person asked, do we have to be in Canada in order to collect EI? To collect regular EI benefits, yes. Typically, somebody has to be ready and available to work. So you have to be here in Canada, and you have to be available to do work. Now, one of the things that's been inherently unfair about the seasonal agricultural program is that although it forces workers to pay into EI, it requires them to go home after 8 months, meaning that they're not able to collect those regular benefits being on the seasonal program by no fault of their own, right? But it's because you're being asked to leave the country in the off season. The thing to remember is that there's a number of different kinds of EI benefits. You've got EI regular benefits, you've got EI sick benefits, you've got child benefits. There's all kinds of, or parental benefits. There's all kinds of potential entitlements under the EI system. So in order for us to really be able to answer a question correctly, it's probably best for you to follow up with the group directly. Again, you can either call or text that number later on, and you can set up an appointment with one of the lawyers that volunteers with Justicia, and we can try and help you work through that situation.
Okay. Y la otra pregunta relacionada a una que ya se hizo es sobre cómo accesar estos beneficios de desempleo. Y esta es una pregunta que es un poco, tiene truco porque el requisito es que para poder acceder a esos beneficios, ustedes tienen que estar en Canadá, pero a la vez el mismo programa los forza a que se regresen a su país y no puedan acceder a estos beneficios.
Vania, te completo lo que estás diciendo, si me permite. Sí. Lo que más, para retomar lo que iba diciendo Vania, es que sí, el programa les permite, están autorizados a recibir esos beneficios por desempleo regulares mientras ustedes estén listos y disponibles para trabajar estando en Canadá. Lo que respondía Shane es que el programa es inherentemente injusto para los trabajadores del programa temporal, y la razón es porque ustedes pagan para recibir esos beneficios por 8 meses del año que están aquí en el país trabajando, pero están forzados a dejar el país por el resto del periodo del tiempo. No por culpa de ustedes, es simplemente como está el sistema diseñado, y eso es lo que lo hace realmente injusto. La otra parte importante es que hay diferentes clases de beneficios de este tipo de beneficios. Hay de beneficios regulares, hay beneficios de enfermedad, hay beneficios cuando usted tiene un hijo, hay beneficios de parentalidad, y todos estos beneficios potencialmente usted podría recibirlos, pero para la persona que hizo esta pregunta, le agradeceríamos que por favor nos escriba un mensaje privado y nos comente su situación en particular, ya que es un poco más difícil de dar una respuesta sin tener en cuenta su situación en particular, y una vez se contacte con nosotros, le podríamos ayudar a hacer una cita con uno de los abogados voluntarios de justicia para trabajadores migrantes.
Gracias, Carmen.
And I think the last one we have, Malika, did you want to take a shot at 6? If you think that there's an unanswered portion of that yet? I know we've gone over this a little bit, but.
I think the idea is just with EI, it's so complicated that it really depends on the individual situation. So if you do have a specific question about EI, it's best to contact us and we can direct you to the right people to answer that then.
Yeah. Great. I think that's about it. None of us who are speaking on the panel have any idea about how many people are watching or any of those kinds of details. We'll find out all of that afterwards. But I guess on behalf of everybody, thank you so much to everyone who's joined on and spent this time with us this evening. As I mentioned, this is one segment of what's going to be a series of workshops that we do, not just on COVID, but on other issues, other legal issues that impact migrant farm workers. So there's going to be regular opportunities for you to tune in, ask questions, and perhaps hear answers to questions that you may not have thought about before that have bearing on your life and your participation on the various work programs here in Canada. So yeah, thank you very much, and I'll leave it to my co-panelists to give any other parting remarks that they have.
Thank you everyone for tuning in, and I hope this was helpful at least for some of you. Thank you, everyone.
Para para traducir un poco la despedida que ofreció Shane, es que de parte de todos nosotros, muchas gracias por unirse y por hacer parte de esta presentación. Esto es solamente un segmento de una serie de talleres que se van a presentar en línea, no solamente con respecto al tema del COVID, sino sobre temas legales que les incumben a los trabajadores migrantes en general. Les agradecemos la compañía del día de hoy, que tengan un buen día, una buena noche.
Thank you. Gracias.
Adiós.